What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily, and in this video, we're going to be re-reviewing the Samsung Galaxy S9 for 2020. Now, the main reason I want to check out this phone again is because if you're interested in getting a new device this year, but maybe don't want to spend a ton of money, this is a phone you can get right now for a really good deal. Obviously, this was Samsung's flagship device from early 2018. And when it launched at that time, it retailed for some $700 or $800. Now, just barely 2 years later, you can pick up this phone on Amazon for well under $300. I've seen some Amazon renewed listings as low as $260, so this phone is an absolute steal. And if you want to check out some of those deals, I'll leave them all listed and linked down below in the video description. So check down there so you don't miss out. Now, aside from the fact that this phone is basically 60% off now, the real question to ask is whether or not this device is even worth it in 2020. Because there's no sense in buying a phone that's been out for a while if it doesn't have the software, hardware, or specs to keep up nowadays. And there's no sense in keeping it either if it's fallen off significantly in just 2 years. But with the S9, I think it absolutely can keep up. And even more than that, it still packs just about everything that makes it a great buy, even in 2020. If you're thinking about buying one, you absolutely should. And if you want to keep it, this is a phone that I think still has at least another year or two of life left in it. Physically, this is a device that's held up really well. It's no secret that Samsung hasn't changed up the look or materials on their flagship devices for quite some time now, so even though this phone is a bit older, you can't exactly tell just by looking at it. It's an all glass and metal build like any other flagship phone, and you're getting the same high quality materials and premium look and feel that you'd get spending more than $1,000 on some other phones. Side by side with anything else released this year, I don't think most people would be able to tell that this phone is significantly less expensive. Taking a look around, the S9 has that subtle curve on the edge of the display that sort of makes it look like it flows off the sides. This is a design element that we actually don't even get anymore, with most of Samsung's phones opting for a totally flat front glass. Paired with tapered sides, the edges of the phone feel incredibly thin in the hand, and overall give the phone a nice feel, especially when you want to use it one-handed. And personally, I do prefer this device over the S9 Plus strictly because it is such a nice balance of size with still a large enough display. Around back, you'll also notice that we get a rear-mounted fingerprint sensor, and I have to say, if the choice is between this or a fancy new in-display fingerprint reader, I'd prefer something like this instead. It's easy to feel for and find, relatively quick and accurate, and plenty secure. While there are other options to unlock this phone, like the iris scanner or facial recognition, a plain old fingerprint reader is something I took for granted, and I think Samsung had the setup pretty much perfect on this phone. And by the way, this device is also IP68 water and dust resistant too, which is great. That pretty much is the standard we have even on 2020 flagship phones. So if you're worried about an accidental drop in the sink or something, this phone can absolutely handle it. The S9 packs a 5.8-inch screen, which is still pretty good even by today's standards. And really the only thing that I think gives this phone's age away are the sizable bezels that frame the display. The top and bottom borders don't look nearly as nice as the Infinity O cutout and nearly frameless design we get on today's smartphones, but at the same time, the even design and lack of any notch I think still make the phone look good and very modern. Sure, we aren't pushing the boundaries on screen-to-body ratio, but realistically, this is still a phone with slim bezels and a compact form factor, housing a big screen with not much else distracting you from the viewing experience. And that viewing experience is one of the main reasons why I think this phone is still well worth it. The S9 packs a Super AMOLED panel at a maximum resolution of 2960 by 1440, cramming in a whopping 529 pixels per inch. That's pretty good, even by today's standards. And let's just say that maybe you were considering some other brand new $300 or $400 device, you likely would only be getting a 1080p display anyway. So by comparison, this flagship screen from 2 years ago is still likely better than some of the displays on new smartphones you might buy today. The S9 is bold and bright, and while it may be a little oversaturated, I think the brightness and detail paired with HDR10 support all yield an excellent viewing experience overall. And while yes, the display technology has changed year over year, I think the difference is so slight that saving hundreds of dollars going with this option makes more sense instead of spending so much extra money to get a marginally better looking screen. Powering this S9 is a Qualcomm Snapdragon 845 chipset the Adreno 630 GPU, and 4 gigs of RAM. Now I think the 845 is still a very capable processor overall, especially if what you're doing is mainly enjoying social media apps, browsing the web, watching YouTube videos, or other content, or playing a vast majority of mobile games too. The only real limitation I see is with the 4 gigs of RAM, which isn't a whole lot. So graphics heavy games don't always run as smoothly, especially when you have them going at max settings. But realistically, all of the games that I tried playing, including Asphalt 9, Real Racing, Call of Duty Mobile, and a few others, all run perfectly fine at their default settings. And I didn't feel like they were really clunky or that the phone was performing poorly. And while you are enjoying your content, you get to experience that dual speaker stereo sound, which is great. Even a lot of phones you can buy today are still only offering the single downward firing speaker. So having stereo sound with an additional speaker in the earpiece is a nice addition. And if you want to listen to your content quietly, you've still got a headphone jack at the bottom as well, which is great. I will say that on the software side of things, this phone just received the Android 10 update with Samsung's One UI 2. And that fresh new software experience improves things quite a bit. Android 10, I think, is well optimized, and One UI 2 loses a lot of the clunky extras that a lot of people weren't a fan of. While it's still all a very Samsung-esque look and feel, you get a relatively fast and smooth experience from an older device, which until recently hasn't exactly been the case on the Android side of things. More than anything though, I think this shows Samsung's commitment in keeping these older devices supported. And I suspect we'll have another year of security updates at least, which is great. Realistically, this is the oldest Samsung flagship phone that'll get Android 10 anyway. The S8 and Note 8 won't. So if you're thinking about any older Samsung phone at all, the S9 is about as far back as you should go if Android 10 is what you're looking for. And by the way, while the S9 does come in an Exynos variant with the 9810 and Mali G72 GPU, if you have the option, I'd recommend just going with the Snapdragon phone instead. A lot of folks have claimed that the Exynos just doesn't perform as well, and it's subject to overheating a bit. So if you have the option, you might try and avoid that if you can. Now, while I can live with 4 gigs of RAM, the only other thing that I have a particularly hard time getting over with this phone is a 3000 milliamp battery. It's just not a whole lot. And unfortunately, even under light usage, this is a phone that has a hard time making it through the day. You do have the option to use Quick Charge 2.0 or Samsung's 15-watt fast charging wall plug to juice up 50% in about 40 minutes. And paired with a nice wireless charger, which this phone supports, you've got a lot of options to keep you powered up. But if this phone has but one fairly significant drawback, it is with that battery life. Just be prepared to charge it up before the day is out, and if you can live with that, or maybe find yourself plugged in anyway with any other phone, then I guess it's not a huge deal. So in regards to the camera, back when this phone first came out in 2018, smartphones weren't really competing yet with who could cram the most lenses on a single device. We were mostly working with 1 or 2 lenses max on all the major brands. And we get a single lens setup on the S9 here, while the S9 Plus was the phone that got an additional secondary telephoto lens. Still though, at the time, the S9's single 12 megapixel variable aperture lens could do a lot. It offered dual pixel phase detection autofocus, optical image stabilization, auto HDR, and could even shoot 4K video at 60 frames per second. And up front, the 8 megapixel f1.7 aperture selfie camera wasn't too bad either. You also have all the shooting modes and features you could ask for, like night mode and live focus and pro controls. And while yes, smartphone cameras have evolved a lot over the last 2 years, probably more than any other aspect of the phone, there wasn't anything wrong with the S9 to begin with. While you do get that punchy, oversaturated Samsung look that was pretty standard at the time with pictures, the result was still a great photo, even by today's standards. So if you couldn't tell already, obviously I think the S9 is a great buy in 2020. This is a phone that was just updated to Android 10. So it feels just as fresh and new as any other Android device out right now. And it offers flagship hardware and specs for 1/3 the price. Sure, battery life could be better, and the 4 gigs of RAM might not be enough for everyone. But if that's the case for you, then the S9 Plus is actually just as good of value. So you may as well consider that. And hey, if you have the S9 right now and feel like you're missing out by not getting an S20 or something else, just keep in mind, you've got yourself a really good phone still. And realistically, you aren't missing out on much by keeping it. If anything, you're really just saving yourself a huge chunk of money on a phone that's only marginally better than what you have now anyway. Overall, the S9 I think is a fantastic phone for 2020, and I'd absolutely recommend it. So there you go, that's everything you need to know about the Samsung Galaxy S9 and how it might stack up this year. If you are currently still using the S9, feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments below. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.